Hi there, Ezekiel here. With the world's attention on London this week, the New York Times sent their new reporter to interview a member of the British aristocracy with an insider's view of the royal family. We are, of course, referring to Lady Hortensia Crawfish Dunn. Double N. Well, when I was first approached by the New York Times to give my view on the new monarch, I was so excited I could hardly believe it. I had no idea we had one. I thought most monarchs were now virtually extinct. Certainly in this country. You see, so much of their habitat has been destroyed, but to discover a new one, alas, it was not to be. It was a slight misunderstanding, due to bad grammar and semantic chicanery. Just as my lepidopteral juices were starting to ooze, it became apparent they were not talking butterflies at all. They were, in fact, asking my opinion on the elderly new monarch, soon to be Juggies the Third, or Jugsy, as he was known at Gordonston, which he apparently hated. The school, that is. You see, being 102, I have a very unique view of the monarchy that few alive today possess. I suppose you could say I've seen it all. His mother, the previous monarch, and I crossed paths. All too often, really. Although if I saw her coming first, I would try and give her the slip, even at palace parties, which I'm currently boycotting, due to the appalling treatment of my friend, Lady Hussey, Jugsy's own godmother, who gave her entire life in the service of that family. The way he just cast her aside was unforgivable. So, when asked questions about the soon-to-be elderly new monarch, I felt I could answer honestly and forthrightly. The first question concerned the unusually long apprenticeship of 70 years training to be monarch. Did I think it was too long a period? To which I responded, no, not really, considering that the males in the royal lineage are notoriously dim-witted. I think it's due to the intergenerational and familial inbreeding that's taken place over the last few centuries. It's only fairly recently that the royals have looked beyond familial links to marry into. I mean, most people think that the late Queen's mother was royal, due to her family's connections to Glamis Castle in Scotland. But you see, her father's side of the family were in fact Geordies, who married into the Laird of Glam's family. The Laird of Glam's wasn't real royalty, but an enforcer for the royals of Scotland, a bit akin to a mafia don. So, with that sort of lineage, is it any wonder she was a bit too fond of the Nuki Brown bottle and died with debts of over £2 million? I was then asked what were my observations of Charles growing up and as a young man, to which I replied, he was never a young man. He was elderly, even as a child, very morose and miserable looking. I blame the parents, really. I think they were projecting their early marital problems onto the children, what with Prince Philip's philandering and incessant racist gaffes, and the Queen's constant interference in the life of her sister Margaret. Pure jealousy, you see. Margaret was the beautiful one. It happens with sisters. Men adored her. I don't know why. She stank of cigarette ash. You could smell her coming from several yards away. Whoop. By now, I was getting into my swing, and the young lady reporter was frantically scribbling in some very odd shorthand. With all that going on, is it any wonder that old Juggy has struggled educationally? He was offered a place at Cambridge, reading archaeology and anthropology, and it was a shoo-in, really. It did no harm to the university to have a royal attendee, but it soon became apparent that he was not up to the intellectual rigours of anthropological studies. So, to save face and the university's embarrassment, it was decided to change his degree to something easy, like history, which he just about, after some very generous marking, managed to scrape a 2-2 in. Phew! Said everyone concerned. Then it was off to start the royal slut phase of his life, which lasted until he was in his 30s. Almost every week he would be photographed with a different female in the newspapers, usually purloined on his behalf by his bodyguard, all very sleazy and unseemly. I suspect it was an attempt by the firm, as it was now called, to overshadow the loot reports of his initial sexual conquests with a footman. Or was it his male valet? I forget. By the time he was 32, the Queen had seen enough and ordered him to find a wife, and it just so happened that they had one lined up, a beautiful 19-year-old named Diana. The 13-year age difference didn't seem to raise any eyebrows in royal circles, but then his predecessor Charles I married a 15-year-old, and most people thought that Charles II's 21-year-old wife was over the hill at that age. You can see why Andrew got into so much trouble, can't you? Of course, just like his predecessors, Charles must have thought that having a mistress like Camilla Parker Bowles was acceptable, and Camilla didn't seem to mind her husband being publicly humiliated by Charles sleeping with her. Everyone knew about it, apart from poor Diana, who was really only chosen to be the royal broodmare for an heir and a spare, just like Kate is today. It was like watching a lamb to the slaughter on Diana's wedding day. Initially, Charles was devoted to the sex. I mean, Camilla was used goods by then, you see. Well used. But the sex only goes so far. It was the age gap that did it, plus the fact that she was smarter than Charles. Poor girl found out, you see, and wasn't having any of it. There was to be no intellectual meeting of minds, as there was really only one intellect at work, and it wasn't Charles's. The Queen by now had had enough of a hypocritical and adulterous son and heir's nonsense, and decided for both of them that they should divorce, as your mother-in-law does. And so it was done. Diana, after the separation, bloomed like an £18 million flower. Camilla's husband had had enough too, and decided to divorce his adulterous wife on some spurious grounds, managing very gracefully to not say it was because he was fed up of Charles shagging her behind his back. By now I could see that the lady journalist was looking slightly nervous, but I was enjoying myself immensely. I noticed that she'd sidestepped completely the death of Diana and the adulterous wedding that followed, as if it had never happened, and proceeded to ask me if I had had an invite to the coronation. Oh yes, I replied. It arrived last week in the post. She then said, would it be possible to see the invite and maybe take a picture of it? To which I replied, I'm afraid that won't be possible, my dear. I did with it what my mother did with hers when she was invited to the previous monarch's wedding in 1947. Oh, she said, did she put it somewhere for safekeeping? Good Lord, no, I said. She threw it in the bin. I remember her saying there was no way she was going to attend a wedding in the bloody freezing cold of Westminster Abbey in November. I'm afraid the dustman collected my rubbish yesterday, dear. So sorry. But I did send my excuses and thank them for it. I told them I'd booked myself in to have my hair done on that day, which was a little bit naughty of me. Did I mention? I'm 102, and as you can see, no one of my age has hair anywhere, let alone on their head. Even the previous monarch with all that curly silver nonsense on her head. It was made in a small shop near Claridge's. It was stick-on. I believe like her predecessor. She was as bald as a coot. We had a lot in common, she and I. We even shared the same bag designer. Her mother, too. I'm giving away a little royal secret now that I'm sure your readers will simply soak up with excitement. Our bag designer's clients were sworn to secrecy, but as the late Monarch is so, late, I think I can now divulge this little-known gem. We all shared the same Italian designer bags, made by, I think it's pronounced, Urini Medica. They're very lightweight and discreet, and a moniker is on each bag. The late Monarch's mother would order extra large ones. But then, what with a fondness for the bottle? They're beautifully designed and are waterproof and never leak. Would you like to see mine and take a picture of it, I said. And just as I was about to show the lady interviewer my designer bag, she upped and left. Rather rudely, I thought. I wasn't given the chance to give my views on the appallingly criminal tax dodge that Jaggers III has pulled on his £15 billion inheritance, or the obscene waste of public money being spent when over 1 million of his so-called subjects are having to feed themselves at food banks. I won't see it. I'm too ashamed to watch. The annoying thing is, I didn't get the young interviewer's name, so I can't follow it up. Still, I'm sure it will only be drowned out in the barrage of magazines full of old and very heavily retouched photos of the elderly adulterers on the day. Long live Jaggers III! At least long enough for us to tax him properly and fairly, eh?